Okay, wonderful. I'm going to get us started. Thanks all for joining today. My name is Jeannie Merrill. I am the Executive Director of the Berkeley Food Institute, and I'm pleased to moderate today's webinar on global food systems resilience. Today's webinar is part of BFI's Spring Lunch and Learn webinar series, where we highlight food and farm systems research that addresses current policy issues and helps to advance just and sustainable food and farm systems. I have a few housekeeping tips before we dive into today's discussion. Today's webinar will consist of two presentations of about 15 minutes each. Audience members are encouraged to submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to drop your questions throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait until the end. But let me go ahead and I want to introduce our speakers today. We're joined by Dr. Isabel Mezzarea, an assistant professor at UC Berkeley in Food, Nutrition, and Population Health in the Division of Community Health Sciences with the School of Public Health. Her research is in global nutrition and in understanding the determinants of poor maternal and child nutrition outcomes in low and middle income country settings. We're also joined by Dr. Robin Marsh, a senior researcher with the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues with UC Berkeley. Dr. Marsh is a economist, with over 25 years of experience in international agriculture and rural development. On today's webinar, we wanted to highlight food systems resilience research and practice as greater weather extremes continue to stress and strain farmers and food supply chains. National and subnational governments are taking a diversity of approaches to food systems resilience. Here in California, our State Department of Food and Agriculture is currently hosting focus groups on its climate resilience plan for the state's agriculture. Today's presentations will explore how different regions are building stronger food systems in the face of climate change, public health shocks, policy shifts, and socioeconomic challenges. Dr. Mezzarea will examine resilience beyond food production, exploring supply chains, market access, nutrition, human rights, and the broader food movement, including the latest efforts by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization to develop a resilience framework for agriculture. Dr. Marsh will highlight lessons learned from an initiative in Western Uganda, where women-led organic gardens are improving agricultural and climate resilience among vulnerable populations. We'll start today with Dr. Mezzarea.
Thank you so much. Really a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for joining this presentation. I'm going to share my slides just briefly. Apologies for that. But today I'll talk about efforts around the resilience of food systems and highlight some of the work that's being done by the Food and Agriculture Organization and a working group within that I'm a part of, that's trying to work on how we define resilience of food systems. To start off this discussion, I would like to highlight sort of the framework, the broad framework with which we're working to understand resilience of food systems. As you are aware, food systems are very complex. If we can look at this figure and start by looking at the light yellow box, which encompasses everything that we think mainstream food systems should encompass, right? It includes systems supporting food production, food supply chains, consumer behaviors and diets, and ultimately how they link with nutrition and health outcomes and broader impacts, such as economic impacts, as well as environmental impacts. Within that, for example, within the food supply chains, we can think about, from farm to fork, production of food, storage, processing, and retail or advertising of food as being one component. And then consumer behaviors really pertain to what people eat, how they decide what to eat, and their knowledge of what is healthy or unhealthy, and how that translates into their own decisions on what to eat. And ultimately, all these things affect the quality of diets that are consumed, but also affecting, all these domains is really the food environment, the external food environment, the stores that people go to obtain foods, as well as their own personal food environment and issues around affordability. Also highlighting, one thing to highlight is that we are very cognizant that outside of food systems, there are many factors that impact how food systems act and the results or impacts of food systems. So for example, we can think about biophysical and environmental drivers, economic and market drivers, livelihoods, incomes, and social cultural drivers, among other things. And more prominently in the last few years, climate change as being something, as one thing that is really just now affecting food systems and how they function. So as we talk about resilience of food systems throughout this presentation, have this in mind that we are trying to build resilience of food systems across all these different domains, not only focusing on the food system specific areas, but also the things that are external to food systems, but which ultimately impact food systems. And also just to make sure that we start off on the same page, we know that there's several things that are not working with current food systems. We know that they're responsible for producing at least a third of the greenhouse gas emissions, and food systems currently are also destroying biodiversity and soil health, and at the same time reinforcing inequity because they are not doing the optimal for human health and nutrition. We also know that certain food system value chains are aligned with specific crops that require high inputs and pesticides. For example, we can think about monocropping for cereals and grains in sub-Saharan Africa, which is really supported by governments to the detriment of other healthy diets like fruits, vegetables, and legumes. Additionally, we know that while some food systems are overproducing calories, there's also the problem that other food systems are not optimally producing livestock and crop products, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and this is leading to food insecurity and undernourishment. So issues of limited technology and input use is actually still quite problematic. At the same time, we have issues where plantations or large-scale focus of some food systems is really marginalizing the majority, and that our current food systems, by promoting unhealthy production of cereals and grains, is really leaving us with inadequate production of healthy diets and fruits, vegetables, etc. So all these are really things that we think about is also over the last few years increasing unhealthy and ultra-processed foods, not only in high income, but also in low income communities. Now, if we then come back to, what is really going on with the food systems and how does this play out? We know that our food systems, as we've indicated, are really not optimal, but at the same time, they're still experiencing shocks such as COVID-19, climate change, conflict, loss of biodiversity and land degradation. And all of these things really end up disrupting food system value chains. So the farm to fork, from production up to consumption, right? At the same time, now when we, add onto the, disruption in food systems, other pre-existing factors like, poverty, financial stresses, and things like that, we end up with this problem of unaffordable or unhealthy diets that are mostly available within communities. And so this then begs the question, so how, when we talk about unresilient food systems, how can we characterize this? So some of the ways that traditionally we've looked at this was looking at whether, food systems can withstand shocks, whether they are harmful to ecosystems and environments. And more increasingly, we are thinking about food systems not being robust in that they can't prevent or reduce shocks. We do believe that there's a certain measure of prevention that's possible with resilient food systems. In addition, we think unresilient food systems are extractive, where production is really around, getting the, certain crops or crops out to the detriment of the environment and communities and households. And in addition, we think that they're not equitable and that consolidation, for example, by processors is problematic across the globe. And all these factors are really contributing to, all different types of malnutrition, including micronutrient deficiencies, as well as adult, adolescent, child overweight and obesity, and risk of non-communicable diseases. So this is really coming full circle for us. So now with this in mind, when the FAO and the high-level panel of experts convened this consultation or this group around building resilient food systems, they were really aware of the challenges of food systems. And, you know, their view of resilient food systems are those that can adapt and recover and can also transform in the face of shocks. Just to highlight that, I'll present some of the discussions from this Building Resilient Food Systems Working Group, although my views don't represent the views of the FAO or this committee, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to share with you some of the global discussions. Some of the discussions really center on, like, if we're building resilience of food systems, resilience to what? Is it ecological challenges, resilience pertaining to food insecurity and nutrition-related challenges, economic resilience, and also resilience for whom, as well as what is the outcome of resilient food systems. And with the outcome, really thinking about food and nutrition and health outcomes, as well as planetary health. One of the critical challenges that we ran into when we started to think about is really how do we even define resilience across food systems. As you can see, different actors have different ways of defining food systems. For example, the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, it really focuses on, you know, improving access for people within the food system, you know, providing a cushioning for actors such as small businesses in the face of disruptions, right? And also addressing inequities and racism as one of the things to consider. And this definition by Tyndall here really looks at, you know, capacity over time for a food system and at all levels to provide sufficient, appropriate, and accessible food. And as the figure on the right shows, this is really thinking about shocks. You know, if a food system is subject to shocks, how can it absorb the shocks, react, restore, and then learn to rebuild robustness? And finally, a few years ago, under the UN Food Systems Summit, resilience was really just further defined as really focusing not only on individuals or communities, but households, institutions, and systems pertaining to prevention, absorption, response, as well as increasing efficiency of food systems in the face of risks, but also long-term prospects for sustainable development, including peace, security, and human rights. So really bringing the human rights angle to resilience, which was previously not a part of this discussion. As you might have gathered from my first few slides, we think that there are challenges with traditional current approaches to defining resilience, where we think that the focus on shocks and stresses, though it's important, might not be enough. And the bouncing back after people are subjected to suboptimal conditions is not optimal because it bounces back to systems that are not functional. And so really addressing deep-rooted food system inequities is really what is driving the work around the FAO around this, and how to impact people and nature in a way that is optimal. So in terms of approaches to transforming resilience, so old approaches to transforming resilience really focused on bouncing back, right, recovering from a shock, and we say that's suboptimal because it doesn't address sort of the lingering or underlying factors. Another approach is to bounce forward by using the equity lens, right? Being able to apply the equity lens as we think about which communities and populations might need additional support, and how do we address an equal distribution of resources within that. Another even, we believe, more important aspect is really, as we're thinking about equity, transforming the whole food system because it is not appropriate for the needs of, of not only vulnerable communities, but for all across the globe. So thinking about both long-term systemic change, but also short-term challenges and how to address them. In terms of how the HPLE, the high-level panel of experts, is thinking about transforming food systems, it really is, the prize is really, or the ultimate goal is to have food systems where institutions, policies, people, and ideas uphold capacities of all, that is, individuals, communities, nature, and socio-ecological processes, right, to transform and to adapt and to, bounce back after shocks and stresses. At the same time, it's a focus on whole food systems, building resilience at all different levels of the food systems, and considering multi-level policies and actions in transforming food systems. Additionally, it is really thinking about how to think about transforming the social, economic, and political and cultural structures that underlie suboptimal food systems, and really transforming this to provide healthy diets, fair livelihoods, and support human health and improve biodiversity, as well as closing the inequity gap. Over the next 2 or 3 minutes, I want to present, just as a way of maybe being a devil's advocate, if you will, some of the possible solutions that have been discussed. The first one is agroecology. We know that agroecology has several benefits, including benefits for regenerating soils, maintaining ecosystem biodiversity, and increasing food security and nutrition, while at the same time addressing climate change adaptation. Some of the lingering questions around agroecology within the global discussion forum is really whether they are adequate to address the production gaps and productivity gaps, particularly in regions of the world where productivity is low from agriculture, such as sub-Saharan Africa. And also, we don't know whether farmers will actually prefer agroecology when they're given the option to practice it. And can agroecology be done at national level? And can it also meet the growing demand for healthy diets? And then finally, within the current political and global climate, resources are required to transform food systems for research, for training, and agriculture extension. Who is going to support, the overhauling of global food systems in line with these requirements? Another suggestion is really still to have some level of intensified production, focusing on meeting the productivity gap, particularly for regions where production is a challenge. For example, sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia. We know that production can be increased by increasing inputs and technology and improving infrastructure. However, we know that the short-term gains in terms of productivity for farmers might really just also lead us to more environmental degradation of agroecological systems and impacts on soil ecosystems, for example. So lingering questions are whether agroecology and intensified production can coexist, and what changes could be made to current production systems to be able to promote productivity at the same time coexist with agroecology. And then with, another, approach is really focusing on indigenous and local communities and promoting the knowledge within these groups. So thinking about culturally appropriate and diversified diets and how they can be harnessed by strengthening local production systems for indigenous crops and livestock, which are in many cases climate adapted. So often crops, neglected crops, as well as practices as being part of a healthy transition to sustainable production, but also thinking about how we can engage at multiple different levels, farmers, cooperatives, small-scale producers within this. And then the question for this is also, how do we scale this up, and how do we scale up local indigenous crop production, and how do we develop appropriate food system value chains? To end off, I think I've run out of time, but I just wanted to highlight that some of the challenges that we've encountered really pertain to the metrics. When we think about resilience of food systems across all the different domains, as you can imagine, there are indicators for different aspects of food systems. For example, indicators on building capacity to evade long-term consequences from stresses and shocks, such as the Resilience Capacity Index, metrics around ecosystem stability. For example, metrics around eutrophication of food consumption, how to decrease that, as well as climate-related, resilience-related metrics. For example, greenhouse gas emissions from dietary patterns or from certain foods. So the gap is really in that we don't have one or a select group of metrics that can help us track progress as we embark on this journey to make food systems more resilient. And this is really a gap and an area for more input. So I'd like to end by just sharing a good example of you know, the thinking around how to transform food systems. For example, thinking about you know, the impact of COVID-19 on food prices and diet quality from some of our work in sub-Saharan Africa. And we really did see that restrictions during COVID-19 restricted access to markets and really made it difficult for consumers to access food at an affordable price. So the need to diversify food supply chains becomes very critical, as well as supporting livelihoods at different levels that really suffered within COVID-19, as well as to make sure that these are fully functional to support the end outcomes. So I'll stop here and hand over to Jeannie and Robin. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. Okay. And Robin, you can share your screen. And and then you just want to unmute.
Okay. And how's that?
Wonderful.
Okay, so, well, I'm really happy to follow Isabel's really interesting food for thought, lots of food for thought presentation, looking at examples of lack of resilience in food systems around the world, and also offering a few possible solutions. My presentation is about a specific grassroots effort taking place now in Western Uganda called 1,000 Women's Gardens for Health and Nutrition. And this is actually an example of success, I would say, at a small scale in building household resilience, particularly for women and children. I'll be showing you photographs all along. This one is right at the RCRA, the Rwenzori Center for Research and Advocacy office in Western Uganda in Kasese district. And the head of the program thought, let's have all the visitors to the office realize that even on a very small scale, you can establish an organic garden that feeds people. And so that's what that photograph is about. Oops. Let's see, how do I go to the next slide? There we go. So the flip side of resilience is vulnerability. And I wanted to let you know of some of the risks that farmers face in Western Uganda, and which is very common throughout Sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the Global South. Kasese is a district in the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains that divide Uganda with the Democratic Republic of Congo. And most of the residents, most of the population are subsistence farmers, cultivating crops on these steep hillsides, which are highly vulnerable to flooding and mudslides nearly every year, and increasingly extended droughts as well. There's a relatively high population growth of 2.5%, and then a steady influx of refugees from the DRC. So together, these exacerbate the land pressures, which exacerbates soil erosion, declining yields, and lower or less food production for the population. This is leading, and Isabel referenced this a lot, to increasing under and malnutrition of children in Kasese. Another risk that I want to bring to your attention, and is something that Isabel has worked on as well, is something I'll call low market food availability. We conducted surveys in 7 local markets of 25 main foods in the diet. And you'll see on the y-axis from matoke at the top to groundnuts at the bottom, over 2 seasons. On the left, December, which is a more abundant harvest season, and on the right, February, March, which is a lean post-harvest season. just to read this, in bright green is the highest availability of that food. And then the pink is 0 or very low availability. And I just want you to look at the change in the colors from the left to the right, and you see reduced market availability and actually very low availability once we get to the lean season for almost all the crops. And then if you go to the left-hand side on the bottom bullet, you'll see that in addition, as a result of this lower supply, there's a high average price increase of 40% on average across the 7 markets, varying from 10 to 70%. So we're having this risk of low physical availability of foods and low access as a result of high prices. So before we get to our intervention, I just want to place you in the context of home gardens as a resilient food system practiced around the world. It's something that I have been studying and working with my entire career. And some of the benefits of organic home gardens actually address the vulnerabilities and risks we just went over. For instance, they mitigate hunger during the agricultural lean season by supplying food year-round. They improve year-round dietary diversity and therefore reduce micronutrient deficiencies. And often many of these gardens, even the relatively small ones, generate some income to be able to purchase food and other basic needs. Another element that Isabel mentioned in terms of resilience is conservation of biodiversity. Well, home gardens provide in situ conservation of plant biodiversity. Okay, so now let's get into the intervention. Again, it's called 1,000 Women's Gardens for Health and Nutrition. And the mission that the program came up with is enabling women's organic gardens as a gateway to food secure and climate resilient families in the Rwenzori region, Uganda. Now, for any students out there who may be listening, you may be interested in the history of this program, because it started when UC Berkeley and local university students, the university in Western Uganda that I'm talking about is called Mountains of the Moon, MMU. They conducted field research on the topic of home gardening and food security in Kasese district in 2019. This led to a published paper and recommendations to expand organic gardening to meet the Kasese district, the local government's priority needs. The district had said, what do we care about most? We care about reducing nutrition and food insecurity, reducing vulnerability to climate change, reducing income poverty. And so I would say this is an example of research to action, and anybody out there who would like to participate in a process that in fact develops an action coming from research, evidence-based, please get in touch with me and I'll tell you more about it. Today, there are 600 women-led organic vegetable gardens, 50 community gardens, and importantly, the community gardens are able to incorporate landless women, because this is on rented land where women, for a small fee, have access to that land for production, for consumption and sale. And I have the website there, which I'll share again. I also wanted to mention the adopter gardens. We're finding a huge demonstration effect. So for as many or more of the program gardens, we're seeing neighbor and adjacent gardens pop up. So I think many of you may know that it sounds easy. Oh, organic vegetable gardening, but it's not. If it's going to last long, if it's going to be low input, if it's going to be indeed resilient to climate disturbances, there are a lot of practices that go into it, and they're mentioned here. I'll just give a couple of examples. With water conservation, all of the gardens have raised beds, very deep mulching, rain harvesting is practiced. For soil conservation, there are no inorganic fertilizers. It's all done with composting, which is pretty labor intensive, and so forth down the list. Seed saving is very important. That lowers our costs from season to season because most of the vegetables you're able to save and store safely. And we're also introducing diverse shade and fruit trees. One other element I wanted to mention that allows the program to grow sustainably is what I would call the Model Gardener Volunteer Innovation, or MGVs. And in this photograph, you'll see the MGVs. These women are learning how to formulate botanical pesticides from myriad local materials. So who are the NGVs? They're outstanding women gardeners who monitor and support neighbor gardeners, about 25 gardeners per MGV, which allows the Thousand Women's Gardens core team to expand geographically. The MGV innovation builds local leadership and technical capacities and puts money in the hands of village women, reducing dependency on staff and donor support, which frankly nowadays is a very important element of resilience. The MGV innovation also acknowledges the need for continued support so that the gardens thrive over the long term. We address the challenges, or the MGVs address the challenges as they arise. So now for the next few slides, I want to share with you some of the results of a recently conducted randomized control impact study on 1,000 women's gardens. Our main question is, and this is when I say our, it's a collaboration of RCRA, the program, local researchers, and UC Berkeley. How does vegetable gardening impact family nutrition, food security, income, and other indicators of well-being, especially for women of reproductive age and small children? The study involved 100 randomly selected target households and 50 randomly selected control houses. We had certain budget limitations, so we couldn't go larger than that. These control houses are from the same villages, similar baseline conditions, allowing us to do a fair comparison on with or without the intervention. So our field team, you see in this fun photograph on the right, involved 4 local Rokonzo-speaking researchers with support from UC Berkeley. And Rebecca Gurney, a former UC Berkeley student, is there, myself as well. So what were our research instruments? 2 well-known nutrition surveys, a food frequency survey, and the Household Food Insecurity Access Scale, or HFIAS, which we'll be learning more about, and a very comprehensive questionnaire, plus 2 short narrative audios. It was an intensive process. It took 4 months to complete data collection and cleaning, and then we've just finished 8 months of analysis, and we're going to share some of those results. I know I don't have a lot of time, so the HFIAS tool is globally accepted as an excellent tool for measuring food insecurity. And here are some of the results that I wanted to share with you. The categories that are developed through the HFIAS tool and based on the answers of each of the households go from food secure to severely food insecure. And I just want to bring your attention to the 2 right-hand columns. The target group, 27% are food secure, 38% are mildly food insecure. That brings to 65% of these program gardening households consider themselves, and through the answers to the questions of HFIAS, 65% are food secure or mildly food insecure. Compare that to the control group, where only 20% fall in those categories. This has been one of our more important results. Okay, there we go. This table is probably the most complicated that I'm going to present, but we decided in order to answer our research question, we needed to develop unique composite variables that dealt with our 4 themes of interest: food security, nutrition, resilience, and women's empowerment. Each one of these composite scores has various variables from our questionnaire and our nutrition surveys. And I'll just show you the T statistic and p-value, the 2 right-hand columns, show that the difference in means between the target and control groups are highly statistically significant. And now I'll go over to 2 of these composite scores. And please feel free, I hope you will read the quote as I'm talking to you. This one is from a gardener and her feelings about being part of this program. So here is the histogram of the food security composite score. And the control is the orange on the left. The target group, 100 households, is the blue on the right. And I wanted to show you that indeed, for the target groups on the right, you don't see a long left-leaning tail here. We don't have a lot of low food insecure households as compared to the control. This is something that confirms what we saw 2 slides back. And then this slide is particularly relevant to our topic on food systems resilience. And again, please read this quote if you can while I'm talking to you. This is from one of our 4 Reconzo speaking field researcher and deals right on the topic of climate resilience. So this is one of the more important things I think I can present today, which is what variables did we use to come up with a composite score of household resilience? We combined income diversification, household assets, illnesses over the past 12 months, water availability, and climate-smart gardening practices. We were able to scale all of these and for each of the households for a total maximum of 20 points. So here you see the histograms again. Control on the left, the orange, and the target households on the right, blue. Now, even though the means are statistically significantly different, with the target group much higher than the control group, I do want to draw your attention to the left-leaning tail of the target group in blue-green, which goes considerably to the left, showing that at least a quartile, if not more, of our program households still have relatively low household resilience. Household gardening is not a panacea. We have to work on all of these aspects of resilience, something that Isabel talked about, something I believe in, which has to do with the integration of all of the components of resilience for a rural household. So my final slide presents some concluding remarks or lessons learned. Successful approaches to building household resilience, in my view, are integrated and address multiple vulnerabilities, improving food security, child health, women's empowerment, income and savings, local capacities, and leadership. For poor rural households in climate high-risk areas, women-led organic vegetable gardening can be an important component of food systems resilience. Our intervention, 1,000 Women's Gardens, is an approach that is scalable and sustainable. It uses low-cost inputs and local capacities. And I want to reference again the importance of our model gardener volunteers innovation. Nevertheless, many structural issues are not addressed, such as land access and insecurity, very low returns to wage labor in this region, political unrest, and others. Therefore, we acknowledge that integrated home gardening is successful at building household food systems resilience within severe structural limitations. And with that, I hope I didn't go over Jeannie and Isabel, but I really welcome any questions in our discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. Thank you, Isabel. We can stop sharing screen and open it up for questions. And I see in the Q&A, we've had a number of questions, some of which, thank you, Isabel, for responding, and I've responded to some. But let's just go through those. Robin, there's a question for you. Can you tell us more about your Women's Empowerment Indicator?
Yeah, and I wish I could bring it up, but at some point while we're talking, I'll actually put it in the chat screen, the different variables that are there. We had, it's a combination of narrative and quantitative. We had in the questionnaire about 4 questions related to feelings of confidence, feelings of capacity. We had questions related to domestic changes in domestic relationships, changes in domestic violence. We had a series of qualitative and quantitative questions that we were able to put into the indicator, as well as some of the narrative answers in our audio portions of the questionnaire. And I think I could cut and paste those variables and put them into the chat while we're talking.
Great, thank you. We have another question that I'll open it up to you all, see if you have a response or if we can follow up later. Are there any research papers, perspectives that speak to the resilience of food systems in terms of resilience to shocks like bird flu or other viral diseases, issues comparing conventional industrialized forms of agriculture versus smallholder farms run on agroecological principles?
That's a great question. It's a great question. I don't have the answer on top of my head, but I do know that, issues around spread of diseases is quite integral as we think about, different production systems. And I would think that there would be papers that have looked at that. Usually within food systems, what we often find is there might be a selection of papers, but usually we don't have a lot of research on some of these topics. So I can, just from my own experience, can think that there might be some research, but I don't know that it is fully explored. But certainly the link around, different agronomic practices and how they relate to pests and diseases is really something that's quite important in the field and is being pursued for sure.
Yeah, great. Wonderful. We have a number of questions here. One relates to a question around how to measure resilience. So the question here says, could you please explain the difference between measuring resilience and resilience metrics? In the literature, I mostly see references to resilience metrics, yet I haven't encountered a clear explanation of how resilience itself is measured. How are you measuring resilience in food systems and or households?
Great question. If we could answer this, would save the world.
Yes.
We don't know how to. So just to come back to previous discussion, so resilience is very broad in that when we're thinking about resilience of food systems, definitions so far, I really tried to just bring together different components of food systems as we think about a definition for resilience of food systems. And so the end result is when we think about metrics for resilience, it's often the case that we're looking at dimensions of food systems and resilience pertaining to that. Maybe, in the future, there's maybe a way of trying to harness maybe measuring overall impacts of what we think are resilient food systems and certain metrics. Maybe that could be what could be used as a measure for resilience. But it is really difficult. I think, like I pointed out in my slides, one of the critical challenges is how do we measure resilience and metrics for that? And that's an open discussion, an area for in need of research. Some of the metrics that I've shown in my slides are part of some work that we've done looking at metrics for food systems, where I just pulled a couple that were under resilience. And from that exercise, which was supported by USAID, it was quite clear that, there's no one metric of resilience that's available. There are multiple facets of resilience that are being measured. And that's problematic because it's hard to track progress and also to compare situations and so forth. But yeah, good point.
I could answer something with that too. I have my, I copied and pasted it turns out that there are a number of variables in the Women's Empowerment Resilience Composite Score, but it doesn't, I'm not able to put it in the chat for some reason. It's not, so I might give that to you, Jeannie, to send on later. But when you're dealing with a concrete example like the Uganda one, we really did want to look at whether we could measure resilience from a household point of view. And that's why we have this composite score that looks at, and this is from the literature too, diversification is one of the key components to resilience. This means crop diversity, so that if one crop, is dies from pest or other climate risks, you have others to rely on. It means that you have income generation, so that when your home consumption or your production fails, you're able to buy food. It means health. It means that you're not having members of the family get sick or die, and then you have nobody to produce food. So it means assets, and it means that when you have crop failure or you have health issues, you have some assets that you can sell and rely on. So it's really all of these components that allow the family to not decline into extreme poverty and extreme vulnerability. And, I would just urge people when they're looking at this term resilience to think of it in an integrated way. And it's not impossible. I mean, these are variables that we can get a hold of. It's just that we need to embrace that integrated concept.
Great, thank you. Robin, this next question speaks a little bit to some other work I know that you're involved with, which is in California. Agricultural land use conversion to non-food system space continues to occur rapidly. And the question here is, what does resilience for land use protection look like for us moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much conversion. Well, I guess you could call perennial crops are still food crops. There's a lot of conversion to perennial almonds and pistachios and vineyards and so on and so forth. But yeah, we are now in California, we're going through such a crisis of land conversion and also abandonment of land because of climate, that we're coming up with a lot of new strategies. And maybe some of you know that there's a blending a lot of conservation purposes and small farm agriculture and protection of food systems. And so the land trusts and open space consortiums are trying to buy land that otherwise would be slated for development or speculation. And some of that land is going to be offered into small and medium scale agriculture for organic food production. This is one of the hopeful examples, but I would have to say we're in a critical mode right now.
And I'll just add the California Land Equity Task Force will be coming out soon with its final recommendations addressing these issues as well. Great. We have this is another big question maybe for either one of you. Binyam writes, food systems are broad and complex, requiring coordination across multiple agencies and sectors. What are your suggestions for effective governance of food systems, considering the involvement of diverse stakeholders and policy areas? So, given the complexity, what are your thoughts about effective governance of food systems?
Great,
That's a big question, but yeah,
it's a huge question. I think that, certain approaches that have been tried out really hinge on national governments being the leaders for sort of bringing folks together, at least at the country level. And I think bringing some examples from Ethiopia, different ministries, right? We know that food systems might involve agriculture, livestock, the health people, water and sanitation, safety nets and so forth, but bringing folks from different perspectives together in one room, I think, to discuss some of these complexities is part of the solution. And I think one of the issues as we are going through what we're going through now is whether, reliance on donors, I think maybe that's not the solution, right? This is what we've been doing in the past. But globally, as we think about governance of this space, having more local, say and input in how food systems are built and resilience is developed, I think is quite key. And, sourcing of resources within country, diverting resources, putting forward resources to move certain aspects of food systems is important. And I think also realizing the need to engage with private sector, although it's truly hard to find a good way to do it in a way that, there are no harmful effects. But I think those are some of the broad thoughts that I have.
And I would just echo Isabel's comment about more working at the local level, more local government. The fact is, there's a lot of vulnerability now to dependence on donors, but there's always been vulnerability to dependence on government too. Agricultural extension agents are notoriously not getting out there. They're not enough of them. They're not well paid. They don't have transportation stipends, so forth. So the more that you can put money in the hands of local experts, and whether they're model farmers or model gardeners, it puts money in the hands of families, for one thing. It's extremely low cost, and there's tremendous ingenuity and capability there. So I would definitely say more investment in these kinds of local capacities.
Great. And a related question, again, sort of on the governance theme here, it says, do you have any perspectives on food system governance structures models that you've seen that are effective for addressing resilience? I'll just add a California example, just to throw in an additional idea here, which is there's, I think, increasing interest in more contemporary farmer-driven cooperative models. And for example, there's a relatively new cooperative for ranchers in the East Bay Hills here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where they're producing beef, but have what has been traditionally considered sort of waste products that are actually quite valuable and could be used in secondary markets. So the cooperative is around bringing together multiple small, relatively small East Bay ranchers to identify markets for tallow and for other sort of secondary products from their beef production. And we will know that the East Bay Hills have burned from wildfire off and on over the years, more intensely, more recently. In those areas where we see managed grazing, we've seen better responses, quicker ability to manage wildfire. So it's sort of interesting of like, can you sustain through value-added products, the small scale ranching that happens in the East Bay that is then also providing greater wildfire resilience to the broader Bay Area community that can be impacted by fires that happen in the hills by better managing that forage. Yes.
That's an excellent example, Jeannie. So I think I'll leave it at that. But wanted to also just put in a plug for the resilience report. I see a lot of good ideas coming through the chat. I'm not sure how we can put the link in so people can see it. The deadline is today to respond. So if you've any burning input you'd like to provide to the report, we'll put the report in the chat. Thanks.
Right, and I can put that in the Q&A, I think. Let me see if I can do that. But
I
well,
don't know, like, Jeannie, just if we can share our email, so if anybody wants more information on the study that Isabel has been involved with, and I as well, the process, any students that like the idea of being involved in research to action, you know, types of processes, I'd be happy to respond or involve. I'm sure Isabel would as well.
yeah. In the chat,
That's-
you can add, you just click down to everyone, and then you can enter your email there if that's something you want to share with people. So if they wanted to follow up with you, they can.
We don't have that option, I believe.
You don't? Okay.
That's why, yeah.
Robin just did it. You just have to click on everyone under the
Okay, let me
chat.
try.
Yeah.
Oh.
Isabel, I could probably also just.
Yeah, mine doesn't give me the option.
I'll post yours. Hold on just one second.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're at time here for questions, and I'll put Isabel's email in the chat so everyone can follow up. Thank you both so much for presenting today. I really appreciate the conversation. The Berkeley Food Institute, we're an interdisciplinary policy education and research institute here on campus, working to advance just and sustainable food and farm systems. Our next event will actually be in person, and that will be April 17th at the David Brower Center, where we'll be having a debate about the future of food with Michael Grunwald, author, journalist, contributor to the New York Times. He'll be arguing for greening, more efficient factory farms, and Dr. Tim Bowles, who is faculty director and UC Berkeley agroecology professor, who'll be talking about an agroecological perspective on the future of food. So that event again is April 17th at the David Brower Center from 5 to 6. And we'll have more information posted soon on our website. And for those of you who are local and are able to join us, we welcome you. But thanks again so much for joining us here today. The recording from today's webinar will be posted on our website, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.